Welcome back. Allow me just a quick reminder that after the closing session, we will continue our fruitful discussions in our breakout sessions, interactive platforms where participants can meet financial experts, policymakers, and entrepreneurs. Let's continue now with our program. Time to hear the Mayor of Lisbon, last year's Green Capital. Fernando Medina will address the green transition and the role of the cities.
Dear Minister of Foreign Affairs, dear President of the European Investment Bank, dear President of the African Development Bank, dear participants. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. As proudly Mayor of Lisbon, a historical and ancient city that has recently been awarded as European Green Capital. It is a pleasure to be here with you to share our views about the most important challenge that unites us all in the world: fight and tackle climate change. And this battle is going to be won or lost in urban areas, in cities. That's where the most part of the population lives. That's where the biggest part of emissions is produced. So the battle about climate change is going to be won or lost in the cities, with the success or failure of the policies that we developed in the cities. So the first condition to move forward is to strengthen and to improve the network and partnerships between cities. That's what's happening after 2005, when national governments between failing their international relationship and strength, lacking the strength of the international goals, when it was impossible at the international level to raise that, cities become much more aware and much more strong in connecting networks. But we need to go fast, and we need to go further in expanding these networks. So expanding the networks of cities between European and African cities is of utmost importance. Because sharing these experiences of what each one is doing, it's of utmost importance. And creating the opportunities of changing information about financing mechanisms, about capacity, about how to do things, it would be of utmost importance. And the dialogue between cities has another different. Normally, it is a much more practical dialogue. How to do things, things that work, things that make a difference, things that produce results. One thing that is very important is to understand that this is a common goal for all cities in the world. The developed countries and the cities in the most rich countries and the cities in the poor countries are united by this common goal. This is not a challenge for the cities in poor countries. This is a challenge for everyone together. Because we all know, and the Secretary General of the United Nations has stressed several times, that when we face the problems and the tragedies about anger, about starvation, about huge flux of migrations, many of them are related with climate change, with the difficulty to produce and to live in a much more difficult environment. So this reality is going to be worsened if we don't tackle it together in the next years. Obviously, we are not going to make the same things everywhere. We are not going to reproduce solutions that are the same, but we can learn with each other and we can use the solutions that are best suited for everyone. I can give you an example. The development of rapid bus transit systems in Brazil, in Curitiba, inspired European cities to be much more faster and quicker to speed up the change from individual transport to public transport systems that are that save emissions, that lower the emissions and help the environment and the quality and the sustainable of the development of a city. But I can go with other examples. When we see some African cities that are quickly expanding green areas, that's an example of most importance, because it is a very good way of fighting the heat waves, about creating mobility patterns and paths on connecting villages and connecting different areas of cities, the green infrastructure, a part of a development and urban planning area. So we can learn with each other. We should learn with each other, and we should use what are the most practical solutions to achieve our goals with this idea in mind. This is a common goal. We are going to win or lose it together. This is not a goal that someone can win and the other will not. We just win it together or we lose it together. This is the most important for us and for the next generations, that we can work together between cities, within the institutions that are now focused on financing these green investments to build together the solutions for our common future. Thank you very much.
As Mayor Medina pointed out, sharing experiences is of utmost importance. And that's one of the main objectives of this forum. Carlos Lopes is the High Representative for Partnership with Europe from the African Union. Let's hear what he has to say.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really would like to commend the Portuguese presidency of the European Union and the European Investment Bank for this very important event. African countries are committed to the Paris Agreement. In fact, they were amongst those with the most ambitious targets presented to the agreement discussions. And this was based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Obviously, in addition to the environmental concerns, there are economic concerns resulting from the climate change challenges that we are all facing. We know that 60% of the labor force is employed in agricultural sector in Africa, the most climate sensitive sector. Fisheries and the preservation of our seas and our blue economy is equally important. And taking the example of West Africa, we know that fish catches are expected to decline quite considerably by as much as 50% by 2050, compromising livelihoods along the coasts and making sure also that we have to operate our transitions more quicker than we probably had expected. We know also that the conflict resulting from environmental distress is increasing quite considerably in the continent. And we know that some of the consequences are also in the way we are handling our economies and the fact that we are becoming more and more dependent on a chain of elements that we don't control. We know from the COVID pandemic impact that this can just become more exacerbated. We have seen the devastation with countries that depend on tourism, countries like the Seychelles or Cape Verde that have close to 20 and 13% respectively of employment being generated by tourism, being affected dramatically by such developments. We know also that the commitment to addressing climate change is taking place against the backdrop of us not being able to operate sufficiently rapidly our transition to an industrialized space where we'll have the opportunities of creating the jobs that are required by a booming demographic and by the fact that we have become too much dependent over decades on commodities that are compromised as we move into the future. There is a recognition for the need to shift towards a greener economy as part of these various transitions I was mentioning. But acknowledging that the match of that ambition requires financing. And this financing is becoming problematic. Under the Paris Agreement, a commitment was made to meet a target of $100 billion a year to finance adaptation in developing countries. A great portion of this amount was supposed to find its way in Africa, but we are far from these figures. So much so that it is questionable whether the commitment is still there to meet such figure. or whether it was just a proclamation. Focus on adaptation, by the way, can also be problematic. Adaptation finance in Africa in and of itself is very modest. The involvement of the private sector has been even more of a challenge, as adaptation does not automatically lend itself to profit. Countries will therefore need to mobilize funding, including from development financial institutions such as the European Investment Bank, to meet this challenge, while introducing policies to stimulate private sector engagement, including involving them in mitigation. There is a need to encourage risk-averse investors to look into Africa differently. Initiatives to de-risk funding are therefore useful, but we need to work on their co-ownership, and we need to also work on their transparency. African countries are also increasingly turning into green bonds. This is still an underdeveloped market. Africa still accounts for less than 1% of the issued green bonds, but there is enormous potential to tap into this opportunity if the right incentives are put in place and if the right policies to support them are also followed. We need to also build on initiatives that are emerging in Africa and led by African entrepreneurs. This should not be a one-way traffic. To take the example of agriculture, African entrepreneurs have been innovating, many focusing on organic farming. Africa accounts for 27% already of the certified organic producers worldwide. And I think it is important to mention an impressive 89% increase in agricultural land dedicated to organic production over the last decade. The majority of the products are destined to Europe. And I think it is very important that many producers that are supported in this chain are small scale, including women. Supporting them not only requires investments, but also beyond market access, the right set of trade policies. So I would say the pitfalls of building back better that we all envisage as a response to the post-COVID era has to take cognizance of the fact that Africa has specificities that need to be acknowledged by its partners and that are going to be the contributors for the structural transformation that the continent requires and the continent has put as a priority on its Agenda 2063. I thank you.
After this important contribution from Carlos Lopes, time has come now to explore how to make profit with a purpose, a green purpose, and at the same time, keep business competitive. Paula Cardoso is in charge to moderate the next debate. Paula, your turn.
Thank you, Paulo. Before starting our discussion, we are going to watch a small video, a short video from SolarWorks.
Meu nome é Elisa Samaria Mazive, estou há 9 meses como costureira. Tive como inspiração a minha mãe. Desde pequena eu acompanhava seus trabalhos e daí cresceu o amor pela costura.
O objetivo da associação é mitigar os efeitos negativos da pobreza. Havia mulheres que estavam sentadas em casa, não faziam nada. E a partir do momento que receberam as máquinas, começaram a trabalhar.
A situação de energia elétrica é bastante caótica. Sofremos cortes, temos custo bastante elevado.
O benefício que temos com essas máquinas solares é que não gastamos nenhum valor para carregar as máquinas para poderem funcionar. Simplesmente, por no sol, recarregamos a nossa bateria e a máquina funciona.
O meu trabalho não para. A máquina tem as suas próprias lâmpadas. Posso trabalhar até alta noite.
A SolarWorks está a inovar nos sistemas solares, especialmente em máquinas de costura, entre outras, porque procuramos não só dar iluminação a estas famílias, como também procuramos fazer o uso produtivo desta energia, de maneiras que eles possam gerar um rendimento para as suas famílias.
No futuro, eu gostaria de trabalhar com uma vasta equipe e ter minha própria marca Elisa Fashions.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second panel of the high-level European Union Africa Green Investment Forum. My name is Paula Cardoso. I am the founder of the digital platform AfroLink that aims to promote and visibilize African and Afro-descendant professionals in Portuguese society. And I must tell, I am very excited to be moderating such a fantastic panel on developing profitable, green and sustainable business models, and in particular, on the ways in which private and financial actors can support African entrepreneurship. To address this important topic, we will start with the keynote address from Odile Renaud Basso, President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to address you on the occasion of this important discussion, unfortunately, I do it virtually in a recorded message. There is now a clear and broad consensus that green and sustainable development in Africa and elsewhere cannot be achieved without private sector financing and participation. EBRD began to operate in North Africa, in Egypt, Morocco and Tunisia in 2012, in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. Today, North Africa represents a large share of our operation and one of the greatest success stories for EBRD. So far, we have invested 11.5 billion euros in almost 300 projects across the region. And private sector development, as well as supporting sustainable and green investment and entrepreneurship, have been at the very core of our engagement in the region. Several features of our business model have been key to our success in North Africa. First, our private sector focus, with more than 70% of our projects on the private sector through debt, equity, risk-sharing facilities. Second, our policy engagement. We don't provide only funding, but also engage in policy dialogue on structural, sector-specific and business-oriented reforms. Third, our cooperation with other IFIs and DFIs. We join forces to invest on joint projects representing 6.4 billion, more than 61 projects in the region. And we do not just only invest together, but also coordinated our policy work. For example, in Tunisia, we had joint mission with the EBRD, the EU and the World Bank on high-level mission on reforms, in which all the other IFIs and DFIs active in the country participated. And fourth feature is our strong presence in the ground, with more than 100 staff in the ground in offices in Cairo, Tunis, Casablanca, but also in several secondary cities. Now focusing on concrete example on how the EBRD has supported the green transition and private sector development in Africa. I will start with Africa's largest solar project, which has been financed in 2017 by EBRD and IFC, mobilizing and investing a total of 1.5 billion euros on the solar energy near Benban in Egypt, thus creating Africa's largest solar park and one of the largest in the world. The project received the Global Multilateral Deal of the Year award, and it could not have been possible without intense upstream joint policy work that led to the reform of the Egyptian feed-in tariff mechanism. Second example, in green financing facilities. We work closely with local banks in North Africa to roll out green economy financing facilities, mainly to SMEs, to help them upgrade their production facilities and premises and save energy. Egypt and Morocco have been one of our most fertile markets, where we provided green funding via 12 local banks. This again attracted co-financing from other IFIs and DFIs. And third, SME support. We have a small business initiative who offers SME a product combining financing and advisory support. And we have channeled so far more than 1.7 billion of funding through local banks to facilitate the access to finance to thousands of Egyptian, Tunisian, Moroccan SMEs, including during the COVID crisis. We also work with local partner institutions to encourage lending in local currency and help companies reducing their currency risk exposure. And we have financial products dedicated to women and young entrepreneurs. And in Tunisia and Egypt, we launched a startup support program providing nascent companies with access to know-how and business networks. To conclude, I'm convinced that the focus on developing private sector business through policy work and investment is a way to create the most impact and improve the livelihood of people in the region, but also to support green investment. And I'm convinced that all development institutions working together, building on each and every particular institution's strengths, can deliver more than the sum of their parts. As our shareholders are considering the possibility of a limited and gradual expansion of our activities to sub-Saharan African countries, the EBRD is looking forward to new opportunities to promote further the green transition and private sector development agendas in North Africa and perhaps beyond. Thank you very much for your attention.
After this recorded intervention, let's greet our excellent panelists, starting with Professor Shimseddine Chittour, Minister of Energy Transition and Renewable Energies of Algeria. Welcome. Following is Dr. Kandé Mkela, economist and former UN Under-Secretary General from Sierra Leone, co-chair of the Africa-Europe Foundation Strategic Group on Energy. Welcome. After, I have the great honor to receive Bruno Ven, Chairman of the Association of European Development Finance Institutions. Welcome. Continuing with our introductions, let's greet Viri Shaba, founder and director of Shaba Green Building Design and Engineering from South Africa. Welcome. The next speaker on our agenda is Alexandra Serra, the Executive Director of Águas de Portugal International. Welcome. Finally, we close these presentations with Marta Maris, CEO of Sofid, a company that supports investments projects of Portuguese companies in emerging and developing countries. Welcome. Now that we've met our panelists, we'll have a brief round of opening statements, and then our distinguished panel will engage in a discussion around some key questions. When making your opening statements, I will ask each of you to kindly take up no more than 3 minutes so that we can have ample time for discussion. Let's start once again with Professor Chittour.
Merci, Madame. Bonjour à vous. Permettez-moi tout d'abord.
Thank you, Madam. And good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to say thank you to the chairperson of the EU Commission and to EIB for the organization of this forum. Allow me to say a few words on the energy situation in Algeria. Algeria, as you know it, is a country that has for a long time used fossil energy, and since a few months, we have created a ministry for energy transition, whose objective is to take us from fossil energy by the implementation of renewable energy and by designing a model of renewable energies. It is also important to understand that Algeria has conducted a lot of effort in mitigating the impact of climate change, that is, more specifically, pollution. In this context, a book was written on the impact of climate change that is a real guideline for us towards reforms that are likely to mitigate the impact of climate change. We know that Algeria has committed to 7% of reduction, but we are even planning to increase it up to 20%, provided that we have the relevant assistance. Now, this is, in a nutshell, the situation of Algeria. We are currently in the process of implementation of several initiatives, and we are trying to identify the most adequate approaches that will lead us to these objectives. So this is, in a nutshell, the current situation in Algeria. Maybe later I will have the opportunity to elaborate on several aspects of the point I was making. As a university lecturer, I really want to share a couple of things with you. You know, in Africa, we are confronted to several situations. We have inherited several situations from our colonial past, but nevertheless, what we need to do now is to establish a strategy that will be efficient if we are able to do the appropriate things, because Africa produces only 3% of the CO2 produced in the world. Therefore, it is very important to have a better perception of Africa's development in order to mobilize green funds, and what we are currently discussing among the EIB and the public financial assistance. All this is intended to take us on the way of sustainable development without leaving anybody aside. Thank you.
Please. We can't listen.
Thank you very much. I wish to express deep gratitude to the organizers of the forum and the Portuguese presidency of the European Union for allowing me to share a few ideas with you about EU-Africa Green in this Africa-EU Green Investment Forum.
We are having some troubles with
our keynote speaker, the president.
Dr. Jumkela, sorry. We're having some problems with your connection.
Well, let me take the video off. Can you hear me now?
We will move to Mr. Van, and then we will come back to you. It's okay that way? It works for you? Mr. Van, please, go ahead.
Yeah, many thanks to the Portuguese presidency of the EU and the EIB for the opportunity to speak to you today. As a chair of EDFI, the association representing 15 European development finance institutions supporting private sector and developing countries, I am honored to participate in this high-level forum as a timely event to reaffirm our contribution to Team Europe's ambition to contribute to sustainable development goals in Africa and to align financing with Paris Agreement. With a third of our portfolio of 46 billion euros invested in sub-Saharan Africa, we are by far the largest European provider of financial support to the private sector in Africa. We are very much concerned about the economic and social impact of the pandemic on the private sector, especially on SMEs. And we believe very much that we play a key role in maintaining investment levels in these challenging times in Africa and in bringing investors back into the African markets for sustainable inclusive recovery. The pandemic has revealed the importance of a strong cooperation among DFIs. This collective engagement is reflected by a new coalition for African SMEs headed by and organized and headed by us. We jointly have committed to mobilize at least $4 billion US dollars by the end of this year to African SMEs. With that, we will increase our support of EDFIs to the financial sector that accounts already for 32% of our portfolio even further. Climate finance is our top priority. Our consolidated portfolio in climate finance is already more than 10 billion, with solar and wind and hydro account for 60% of the total climate finance investment. In addition, through the electrification financing initiative, Electrify, which is a 250 million plus euro impact investment facility funded by the European Union and managed by us, we finance private sector projects to provide access to clean and affordable energy in developing countries, as we have seen in the video, for example, in Maputo. And up to now, 42 million people benefit from the project finance so far. For more than a decade, we have been managing co-financing facilities such as the European Financing Partners and the Interact Climate Change Facility, together with EIB, for which more than 1 billion euros have been invested in projects so far. And with the recent replenishment, we have enhanced the efforts to play an important role in Team Europe's investments in private sector approach that scale up climate change and mitigation and energy access. We as EDFI, we work very closely with the private sector in designing policy recommendations that would foster further private investments in developing countries, like we do, for example, under the Renew Africa initiative. Together with the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative and the Global Infrastructure Facility, we just have published investment readiness guidelines. Right policies have an immense potential to mobilize climate finance where it's needed. Last but not least, our harmonization initiative launched in 2019 is currently focusing on delivering a joint EDFI approach to climate and energy finance. Through this initiative, we have recently reinforced our commitment to catalyze private green investment and funding, and believe very much setting a collective example for other investors is particularly important in the lead up to COP26, and as countries strive to achieve a sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Looking forward very much for the debate.
Thank you. Now we are going to come back to Dr. Jumkela.
Thank you very much. I am very grateful for this opportunity to share a few ideas with you about how we can enhance EU-Africa cooperation in the green investment field. This forum is very consistent with the work we're doing in the Africa-Europe Foundation, particularly in my strategy group on energy transitions in Africa and in Europe. But it is important that we note from what we've heard from the keynote speaker that if we want to scale up green investments in Africa, we must start with the upstream policy work. It is crucial that we have the right regulatory and policy environment if we're going to attract large-scale green investments in Africa. So in our work in the Africa-Europe Foundation Energy Strategy Group, we have targeted the whole issue of how we set up predictable, transparent, regulatory frameworks in Africa. And in that respect, we're collaborating with the Florence School of Regulation, the Cape Town University, the Energy Future Center, and several institutions, including the World Bank and the African Development Bank, to establish the first Africa School. As the keynote explained, if you want to attract investments in the range of billions of dollars, the regulatory environment has to be predictable. Second, we need to build the capacity of local African banks to enter the green space. For local African banks, this is still a new area. And indeed, from the keynote speaker, you heard what they did in the case of North Africa to build capacity of local banks, provide also seed capital for them to be able to on-lend. Our local banks currently are not involved in the green space. Very few, apart from South Africa and in Nigeria or in Kenya. Very few African banks, for example, are investing in renewable energy. We need to build capacity there to understand how to do due diligence.
Once again, problems with the connection
on these projects, but also liquidity to be able to invest in these kinds of long-term infrastructure investments. Second, we need more de-risking capital. Because of the weakness of governance institutions, worried about the political risks, but also the foreign exchange risks. We need more de-risk.
We are still experiencing some problems with the connectivity of Dr. Umkela. So let's move on to you, Verishiba. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much sorry, I have a whole speech prepared. This is a big moment for me. So let me just start from the beginning. So I just want to start off by just thanking the European Investment Bank, as well as the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. I think the reason why this weighs very heavily on my heart is because I am the only African entrepreneur on this panel at the moment. And so that means I've got 1.2 billion people who basically I am speaking on behalf of them. And I really hope that I do enough justice to what is going on the ground for us as African entrepreneurs in green. So just to give a bit of context about who I am, I'm Verishiba, and I am the CEO of a company called Green Design here in South Africa. And we specifically focus on looking at green buildings and cities because we know that is one of the best low cost and least cost ways in which African countries can actually meet their NDC requirements, as well as one of the best ways to mitigate climate change, because buildings and cities contribute to 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. And so we think that by actually doing a green transition when it comes to buildings, not only do we solve the electrification problem in Africa, because 55% of Africans still do not have access to electricity, but we also are able to solve the sustainability problem and what we're actually trying to achieve in terms of the Paris Agreement. And so by doing this, we actually provide access to Africans to electricity through green. And that just solves both an economic and an environmental challenge. And so I founded this business at the age of 26, which was a few years ago. I'm now 32, but I founded the business then. And in founding the business, I had no funding at all. All I had was 4,000 euros. And since then, the business has grown in 5 years, where we are overseeing 285,000 square meters of buildings and transitioning that into green, with a project value of 100 million euros. And we have worked in 13 African countries. All of this has been done with no funding at all received from anyone. And so the question for me is really, what if we had been funded? And what if other businesses across the continent, knowing that 90% of businesses on the continent are SMEs? What if they had funding? And a lot of the time, they're not looking for €1 million. They're just looking for €50,000. And so I think the three main things that I would want to say is the first is that Africa is the least contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. We only contribute less than 5%, with South Africa contributing 1%. And so but yet we still have the most ambitious targets towards decarbonizing. And so I think it's not that there's not a will for Africa to go through a green transition, it's that we don't have access to finance. And I think that the reason is because there is a perceived risk about Africa. There's a perceived risk that you can't invest in Africa or African SMEs or African women or African youth. But if you hear my story and knowing that I was selected as one of Forbes Africa's 30 under 30 in terms of climate action, there are businesses in Africa that are like mine and like me. And I think that it's that the advisory, there isn't that connection in terms of advisory to say in Djibouti, in Benin, in Gambia, you know, not only South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Egypt, across the continent, 54 countries, there are youth who are hungry and want to do a green transition, but are just not getting access to that because of a perceived risk about Africa and doing business with African SMEs. And I think the third thing is because I think it comes down to taxonomy. So I think that when you look at investor readiness, a lot of the African businesses have the bankable idea, but it's not structured in a way that makes sense to traditional investors. And I think that if a bit of funding was dedicated towards pre-feasibility and seed, so that stage, I think that a lot of the businesses would probably then be able to get access to larger funding. It's just that we're not creating it in a way that shows that we are investor ready. And so that's really just my contribution in terms of an opening statement. And I really hope that through this roundtable, we'll actually be able to have more of these dialogues, hopefully even with the EIB, but more of these dialogues so that we can actually just figure out how to match the expectations of Europe with the ambition and the hunger and the passion of African green SMEs like mine and others across the continent. And I really hope that that's kind of something that we'll have in terms of next steps from this discussion. So thank you. I know it was a bit shaky at the beginning, but it's weighty on me, and I really hope that we're able to solve the solution.
It was great, Viri. Thank you. It was very inspiring. Now we are following with Ms. Serra, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this inspiring panel. Hello to the participants. And well, I think that there is a large consensus that sharing is a very powerful tool to inspire the green transition. So I'm here just to share with you what Águas de Portugal is doing in our journey towards transition to the circular economy. So Águas de Portugal is a state-owned water operator, the largest water utility in Portugal. We have a national footprint. We are present all over the country. And we are also very active on international markets, mainly in Africa, but also in Latin America and in Africa, in Asia. Águas de Portugal was created 25 years ago to lead the water services reforms in Portugal. And it was indeed a very successful journey. Portugal now has reached excellent standards in water quality, pollution control, and environmental protection. And now we are preparing the future, the next step. And in fact, we are working on a new journey to create and to develop innovative green business models. And this is my challenge in these initial remarks, to share with you what we are doing. And let me tell you that we like to say that more than being a water utility, managing water supply and wastewater, our mission is really to provide environmental services to the society, to the well-being of the society. And well, in one flash, let me share with you our journey. And we are working in parallel in 4 main dimensions. The first one is innovation in governance. this green transition is not only about technology. It's also about stronger institutions, new ways of creating institutions. And we believe that new business models demand new governance. It's not possible to develop new approaches with the same old governance models. And last year, Águas de Portugal created a new company, ADP Valor, which is an innovative instrument to accelerate innovation and to take value out of these new business models in circular economy. Another dimension is that we are trying to capture synergies between resources valorization and energy neutral solutions. ADP Zero program is under implementation, and it is a program of being energy neutral in our operations by 2030. And at the same time, we have our sludge management master plan, which includes green investments of around 100 million euros for the next 5 years, with the objective to reduce 50% of the sludges generated in wastewater, and mainly to reduce our carbon footprint and also to valorize and to produce fertilizers and other valuable materials out of this raw material that is the sludges. Third dimension that we are working, and I think it's very important, and the video, the inspiring video in the beginning also shows this. It's really important to connect infrastructures and circular economy with digital technologies. And we are doing that in our new business models for circular economy. These models are being leveraged by B2B platforms, digital platforms, to connect assets with resources and with all the business players in the models. Last one, but not the least, virtuous partnerships and new partnerships that must involve water users and also economic sectors. For example, we are working with agro-industries, with farmers, in a very virtuous projects that include wastewater recycling, includes fertilizers using our resources that come out of our operations. Last note, regarding financing. I think that good projects easily attract financing. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is yours now.
Thank you so much.
Marish.
Thank you for this invitation, and thanks to the organizers, the Portuguese presidency of the European Union, and also the European Investment Bank. It is an honor to be here sharing the panel with such distinguished speakers. A warm welcome. I would love to have you all here in Lisbon, and a particular welcome to Bruno Venn from the European DFIs. SOFID is the Portuguese DFI. We have 80% of our portfolio concentrated in projects in Africa, some related to climate. We signed, among other DFIs, as Bruno already have said, a statement on climate and energy finance. So we committed to exclude coal and fuel oil financing till 2030, and to be with zero carbon emissions in our portfolio till 2050. So climate finance is become a priority for us as other DFIs. And as we already heard, Africa is the continent suffering the most from this climate change. And 55% of people don't have access to electricity. And we can imagine how this is important for the economy. So we know that we need that economy and politics agree and align the activities on SDGs and Paris Agreement. I will just bring here 3 dimensions that I think they are very, very important for the sustainable business model that we want. And these 3 dimensions are, of course, the first one, the private sector. We have to crowd in the private sector. we know that there are huge opportunities in Africa, and that become very visible when we visit a country in Africa. And we can ask, why doesn't the private sector jump in? So that's the first dimension I would like to bring here to our panel. The second one is capital. We need huge amount of capital to inflow to Africa. And this can become, it is the role of financial institutions like SOFID and others, and the European Investment Bank, of course. And finally, I will have to speak about the political dimension. It's not just economics, as we know. We have to be at the European level, the level of the member states from one side, and on the other end also from the African governments, we have to have an alignment so that we can have this new business model, so that we can have a more green economy as we all wish. Finally, just one final message. We have to have a global collective support, and we have to have action, in fact. So I hope this conversation can inspire some of you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Paula.
Thank you. Thank you all for your excellent remarks. With our topic discussion in mind, I am going to address the first question to our entrepreneur, Viri Shaba. Viri, can you tell us, based on your entrepreneurial experience, what do you think that we should do to support more African entrepreneurs, specifically women?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. What I would say is I'll probably just give a bit of the context. So in terms of the venture capital funding that came into entrepreneurs globally, it was 281 billion euros. I'm going to use before COVID because obviously 2020 was different. Of that 281 billion euros, 500 million euros went to Africa. That's 0.2% that went to African entrepreneurs. And this is in terms of VC, so venture capitalist funding, which is what most of the African businesses have to access, because conventionally, a lot of them don't really qualify for that funding, but they'll more likely qualify for funding from a venture capitalist or an angel investor. Of that 500 million euros that was invested in Africa, 0.2%, only 30 million euros was invested in African African businesses that had a female co-founder. So that means 0.01% of VC funding is going to African women and African women-led businesses. And so I think that just from an entrepreneurial perspective, I think what we could do to help change that, is to maybe start off with that there are very limited number of female decision makers or African female decision makers that are influencing the deployment of capital into the continent. Just to give a bit of insight, so we started Green Design Capital, which we're opening up the fundraising for that on the 30th of April until the 30th of June. And we had to start that because we found that it's the smaller amounts that I had mentioned to go into educating African entrepreneurs, specifically women, on how to be investor ready, because that's really where the problem lies. So they're not even qualifying for some of the seed funding. And so it's really looking at how we can just get more of that investor ready knowledge and education into a lot of great businesses that are there, but that just don't have the model that's required. I think the second thing is just also looking at mentorship. And so looking at how people can move from seed funding to Series A to Series B. That's not really happening a lot with the African women entrepreneurs. And so again, it's actually stopping and asking, why is that the case? Because it's not that there is a lack of talent, it's that there's a lack of opportunity. And so I think it's really trying to see how to best get them to have mentorship. So for me, the greatest lessons that I learned was actually when I was flown up to Germany in 2017. And that was my first time going back to Europe since being a teenager. And I'm an engineer, mechanical engineer, so I love German engineering. And for me to actually see it and to be able to meet with businesses that side and to really have that be part of that ecosystem, that helped. As well as when I have gone to Finland and Italy and you know, I've really traveled a lot to Europe to the point that I do want to do my master's in Europe so I can spend more time there so that I can bring more capital into Africa. I think that it's really getting that mentorship in place as well. And then I think just the third thing is, again, first stage financing. Ultimately, it's just, as I said earlier, a lot of these businesses for seed and for pre-feasibility do not need 10 million euro as, you know, as their ticket size. They actually just need, you know, 500,000 euros or something less than 50,000 euros. And I think that it's really being mindful not to just copy and paste an investment model on our continent. And a lot of that normally doesn't look at seed funding, that's normally done by angel investors, but looking at seed funding, because that's something that I think will make a difference in terms of that. So it would be investor education to get female entrepreneurs on the continent investor ready. It would be mentorship, maybe partnering some female startups in Africa with female startups in Europe or something along those lines, just so that they can also see how it is done in terms of being able to, as again, I said, the taxonomy, so the language. A lot of female entrepreneurs in Africa focus on the social impact and not on the return on investment. And so I think really helping us to understand the terminology from that perspective. And I think the third one is looking at the true stages of Africa on the ground and understanding that the majority of entrepreneurs need seed funding. And from there, they'll be able to fly and really go to Series A and Series B, but it's that beginning. And the fourth is, I spoke about access to electrification. I just added this now, but also remember access to technology. A lot of, if there's 55% aren't electrified, then they don't have access to technology and digital. And so I think being on the ground makes a difference. There's good stuff happening in countries that we don't know about because they don't have access to internet. So yeah, that would be my thoughts.
Thank you, thank you for your reflections. At this point, I'm going to ask if any of the panelists would like to make some additional comments. Anyone? Yes, go ahead, Mr. Van, please.
I think what she addressed is very crucial, and I hear that quite often. And let me firstly start with saying that I'm also a member of the advisor group of the Tony Elumelu Foundation. And the Tony Elumelu Foundation has a Pan-African network that helps to create entrepreneurship and providing also seed capital. And I'm very proud that 70% of the alumni are women, and we can also see that there is really impact and changing. But what you address is that it's fundamental. There's a fundamental change needed in the financial industry in Africa, because in most cases, banks to some extent are hesitating to provide finance to small and medium-sized enterprises. This has to be changed. And this is why also policy reforms by the banking regulator, by the central banks are crucial. Then the second, what you referred to, venture capital funds. That's also a new technology which is not very well known. And even in Europe, I can tell you, we are facing the same problems. And whenever I discussing with German entrepreneur startup companies, they're more or less coming out with the same arguments and the criticism. And this is why I would like also to touch upon once again on some kind of policy reforms. I know that there are a lot of pension funds in Africa. They have a huge amount of funding, but they really don't know where to invest in the context of Africa. So once again, creating an enabling environment which allows the pension funds also to put some funding in seed capital, venture capital, this would help very much. And the final point I would like to make is with the female entrepreneur. We in EDFI, we are extremely proud that some of our members have joined forces and have created together with other bilateral DFIs a 2x challenge. And we originally projected to commit 3 billion, but the outcome last year was that we came out with a little bit more than 4.5 billion US dollars for women entrepreneurs. And once again, TA is needed, what also the professor was alluded to, TA for banks, making banks much more aware how to develop the right credit technology that fits for female entrepreneurs and for the needs of small and medium-sized enterprises. And some of our members actually are providing this kind of capacity development. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Van. Now let's turn the floor over to Professor Chitour. Professor? I have a question. I don't know if you are listening, but we are not listening you.
Oui, posez votre question.
Okay, now we're good.
Est-ce que je peux parler?
Okay, okay. How can we foster?
Est-ce que je peux parler?
Merci. Thank you. How can we foster public-private collaborations?
Comment?
In your opinion.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you for this question. I really think that in order to be operational, we need to take stock of the situation. And this has to do with a clear perception of the situation, the picture of the situation from one country to another country. And what I feel is that countries that have some experience and that have also significantly contributed to this pollution should do far more than what they have committed to. I think this is pure logic. And I think if at least they could do it, we would be able to solve several challenges, not only in terms of energy, but many other subsequent related issues. This said, the question of private and public funding comes on the table. Yes, the public sector should come on board. But I think, first of all, the developed countries should take more responsibility facing the current situation. And for me, we shouldn't apply the same funding mechanisms to countries because, you know, we don't have the same conditions. Risks have to be taken, and when we take risks, we are rewarded by the development of better conditions. And I think that it is very important to also focus on training, because training is how we will foster the development of Africa and have an Africa with well-trained youth on matters related to ITCs, renewables, in order to shift from fossil energy and also to have less consumption and smarter consumption. And for this, we need smart intelligence, artificial intelligence, and all sorts of technologies. And I think that the African youth have all the capacities of innovation. They are full of ideas and inspiration. And what remains to be done is to give them the opportunity, because the financial aspect is not necessarily the most important part of the approach. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you, Marta, if you can please chime in on the same topic.
So first, not to answer, but here's my opinion about the female and women finance. Just to say that I think a lot of things are needed to do, and in terms of this finance and the way we look to this finance. Most 93% of women in Africa, they work in the informal markets. So it's very difficult to have an idea of their, and the other thing is that they are not the owners of the land, normally are the men. So we have another issue with the collaterals. So I think there's a lot to do, and I'm completely agree with you and your words. About DFIs and DFI paper, the DFI role in this crisis, we were asked to be counter-cycle. And this means a lot. This means DFIs and development banks should mobilize capital, huge amounts of capital, should take greater risks, should create visible and measured impact, and also at the same time be agents of this transition. And so how can DFIs play all these roles and have all this challenge? In fact, there's a framework created under the new European budgetary cycle from 2021-2027. There are 3 important pillars that I will mention because this is the framework that will allow DFIs to answer to all these challenge. The first one is the de-risking instruments. We need to have new instruments, and with the EFDS Plus from the European Union, we will have that, and also with the blending possibilities. We will have other actors taking risk and with other risk appetite. But I think we have to think about this question of risk and the equation risk capital, because it is really, really important. And it is more important even if we think about the fragile countries and the LDCs, and to have impact on those countries and taking risk on those countries. It's in fact very, very difficult. And we have to be sure that the local banks plus the DFIs are not enough. Our capital is not enough for this. So we must have what we call off-balance sheet instruments so that we can do more and to have more impact. Another point and another pillar from this plan, this European plan, is the technical assistance. And this is also very important because we heard on these more than 20 green talks about bankable projects. And so we need to help the projects to be bankable, what we call bankable. Finally, again, governments, we need to have and create the climate for investment. It is very important, and DFIs have here a role, that we need to be institutional reforms. We can be the bridge between the private sector and the governments to have institutional reform and policy recommendation, and that's very important also. Finally, I will say that when I start studying, we talk about creating value, and that was the most important thing for the shareholder. We just talk about shareholder and created value. When I start working, I was in a commercial bank, and we learned that it is not just create value, it was also capture the value that was very important in cross-border transaction. And now we are talking about an all new thing, a kind of a revolution. We are talking about what is value. And here, again, DFI have a huge role regarding this part of what is value, because value is impact. And it's not just for the shareholders, it's also for the stakeholders. So, we as European DFI, we are trying to measure this impact. and we are trying to standardize indicators of this impact. So we are learning a lot, and we are doing a lot, and we're reporting this, because it is very important to report on this impact and this value that we are doing. Finally, just a word, the pandemic just teaches that we are stronger together. And we have Team Europe, a European initiative where we are, all the European DFIs and the EIB and the EBRD, we are together to do more. So this collective action, it is very, 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 very important. So just to mention that, up to you, Paula, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Marta. Now let's hear from you, Alexandra. Can you tell us about which types of business models and financial instruments seem most effective for driving green investment, and where innovation needs to be focused going forward?
Thank you very much for your question. Maybe it would be useful now to look at the definition of what is a green business model. And I personally like this one. Green business models are driven by services and solutions that provide environmental and climate benefits, generating value and resulting on the well-being of the society. So just to framework the discussion, I think it's important to have a common understanding about what is the definition of a green business model. And using these last remarks from Marta, I really believe that these challenging times are opening new opportunities, and that we all have a common responsibility to capture value out of this new normal coming from the pandemic and other big challenges that we have to live with. So coming to your question, and also I think it's a common understanding that, first of all, this green transition and the developing of these new green models, business models, we have to do it with a sense of urgency. It's urgent to make it happen. And that urgency also applies to have agility. Institutions must be agile to cope with this sense of urgency. We need to be quick. We need to accelerate this transition. And for that, as you were mentioning, innovation is really instrumental. And as I told in my initial remarks, it's not only about technological innovation. It is how to have a new vision to integrate existing technologies in a way to generate value out of the green investments, okay? And, of course, partnerships. And let me just make a quick remark about Africa. I wish Portugal is very active in Africa. We have African partners. Some topics about what should be catalyzers for profitable, green, and sustainable business models. First, I think that we have in Africa two waves at the same time. In Portugal, 25 years ago, we had to deal with a huge infrastructure gap in the water services, very, very poor water indicators, and we managed to improve a lot in 25 years. In Africa, there is a similar situation where we were 25 years ago, but with a big difference. They have two waves simultaneously. The need to reduce the infrastructure gap, but also taking advantage of the digital revolution that we didn't have 25 years ago. So I think this is a big advantage to go quick and to go in the right way. And also, it was mentioned here, institutions and human capital. I think that in Africa, it's needed more good governance, more strong institutions and regulations to cope with the risk management, to increase the attractiveness of the financing institutions. More new financing instruments is very important. It was already mentioned here. It's really also important to reduce the administrative burden. If we need to go quick, administrative and bureaucratic burden should be minimized, really reduced. And more pilot projects. I think pilot projects are very, very important. Also, work in human capital with more exchange programs, as it was mentioned. Sharing and having flows and networks of communities, of entrepreneurs between Europe and Africa, I think it's really, really very important. Sharing is really powerful to inspire this change, this green change. And last idea, and Marta also mentioned, action is very important. So I leave here a message that it is really important to go for action-oriented programs to foster this public and private collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandra. Before ending this panel, I would like to ask one more question to all of you. If you could highlight just one idea as the most important takeaway for our audience today, what would that be? Professor Chitu, can you start, please? We are not listening yet.
Oui.
Thank you.
Je n'ai pas bien compris votre question.
I was asking.
I'm not sure I got your question clearly.
Just one thing from all this discussion. What would, what would that be?
Directly speaking, I would say that it is to continue to hold such meetings, because it will bridge the actors from different continents. We have a lot of potentials, but we need to hold such meetings to get the impetus needed. And from my perspective, this cannot happen without further meetings and dimensions. And personally speaking, I think we have the human dimension, which is very important, because Africa, it is a large continent, and I believe we need to make sure that the solutions that are given to Africa are not developed elsewhere. Because if we go by that way, any solution will just make the situation more challenging. It won't change anything, because the problem is not just energy. When we talk about transition in Africa, we need to make sure that we have the minimum it takes in terms of energy. Earlier on, we mentioned that we have about 380 people without access to electricity. What does it mean? This means that there is a continent with great potentials, but which cannot make a step forward due to lack of energy. And once again, I agree that such actions will not reach the optimal level without involving different solutions or therapies. First of all, we need to take stock of the situation on the ground, because for you to combat poverty in Africa, do you know that we are expending 800,000 billions in the weapons? This is something that cannot be acceptable, and there's a need for a change. So I think on the side of those who have the responsibility to change humanity, they have to make a change on their side, because they cannot make any change if they don't understand the basics that it takes to make sure that Africa can take off. We shouldn't act without the youth, because the youth is the future power of Africa. Here is a continent that is the face of the future, but which is teeming with resources, not only mineral resources, but all the resources needed, but which is still stuck. So from my perspective, the SDGs can't be achieved without touching on those aspects. So we need to mobilize private funding. And as I said earlier on, there's a need for more risk appetite, because from my perspective, you can, if you set a debt on Africa, I said it earlier on, for 1%, for 1 billion people. But industrialized countries, they do that for 1 billion people. But they are emitting 1,400 CO2. And I said earlier on that the Green Fund may not be enough, and that we need to reach a bit further. And all of us, if we come together, I'm sure that we can come up with a solution that can help the earth. And I believe sustainable development shouldn't leave anyone out. Thanks a lot. Voilà.
I will start with you, Mr. Van. Please, your final remarks.
So my final remark is that that we as EFI, we could play a greater role in Africa and the green investment if the conditions are right. So that's a policy issue, that we solve the issue of project development. And this is then my final statement: working together. Would be my takeaway. Policymakers, public development banks, DFIs, private sector and NGOs from Europe and Africa join forces for a green Africa.
Viri, it's up to you now. Thank you.
My closing statement would just be that Africa is definitely committed to a green transition and a green development growth plan, because that addresses energy scarcity, energy equity, as well as energy sustainability. But I think that there is a perceived risk in Africa. And I think that, yes, policy reforms definitely have to be in place. But while that happens, the continent still needs to carry on with the green transition. And so I think it's really looking at developing Africa-specific financial models that would be able to work, maybe by looking at investing in African entrepreneurs and SMEs that make up 90% of the businesses in Africa. So what I would just say is that with the largest demographic in Africa being women and youth, I don't believe that one can state that they are committed to investing in Africa if they're not intentionally and measurably investing in African women and in African youth-led businesses.
Thank you, Viri. Now, Alexandra, can you share a final idea?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that it is very clear that we have to have a common commitment that we need to go faster in this green transition. And I think there is a lot of things to win, to benefit from having sound networks of organizations, NGOs, entrepreneurs between Europe and Africa. And how? By doing pilot projects, pilot business models that could be disseminated and could be replicated in other contexts. So this is my contribution.
Thank you, Alexandra. Marta, please.
Thank you. First, Africa is the present and the future. Green investment must be the way. We need collective action, just these two words, collective actions. And of course, DFIs have a very important role. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists for the valuable contributions. I believe that this panel discussion brought to our attention important reflections and ideas that will help us move forward. Now, I return the floor to you, Paulo.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you all. This morning's session has come to an end. In around 1 hour, we will be back. In the meantime, let's not forget the words and the example that Ursula von der Leyen has given us earlier this morning. Renewable energy is by now cheaper than most other energy sources and creates more jobs. Think of Africa, the sun, the wind, the geothermal energy. See you soon.
Portugal assume a presidência do Conselho da União Europeia durante o primeiro semestre de 2021. É a oportunidade para promover uma agenda atual para a União Europeia, indo ao encontro dos cidadãos europeus, das suas ambições, dos seus interesses e assuntos, dos desafios globais que têm impacto nas suas vidas. É um reencontro dos Estados-membros numa altura de extrema importância para a coesão e solidariedade da equipa europeia em torno dos seus valores, metas e objetivos de crescimento. As transformações que se fazem sentir em todo o mundo e nos afetam a todos merecem da União Europeia respostas sustentáveis, responsáveis, globais. A presidência portuguesa vai destacar a forma global e integrada com que a União Europeia responde aos grandes desafios da modernidade. A Europa social, a transformação digital, as preocupações ambientais, a abertura a outras regiões do mundo. A resiliência da Europa assenta na solidez das suas respostas e modelos de desenvolvimento, que colocam os cidadãos no centro do projeto europeu e que contam com a coesão e solidariedade das suas comunidades para superar as adversidades, nunca deixando ninguém para trás. Portugal assume a presidência do Conselho da União Europeia com a naturalidade da sua liderança, no diálogo com outras regiões do globo e com os seus exemplos de boas práticas nas políticas de desenvolvimento, demonstrando a resiliência do modelo social europeu. Portugal vai projetar uma mensagem de solidariedade e de confiança no futuro, promovendo o país na Europa e no mundo, destacando a sustentabilidade ambiental e social, a globalização responsável, o acesso à tecnologia e à digitalização. A partir do Centro Cultural de Belém, centro operacional da Presidência, as atividades e reuniões vão alargar-se a outras cidades de Portugal e a palcos virtuais por streaming e videoconferência com outros Estados-membros. Uma presidência digital em que a tecnologia e a inovação aproximam a Europa e os cidadãos. Esta visão integrada afirma Portugal como protagonista global aberto ao mundo, que assume o seu papel condutor da União Europeia por ocasião da presidência. Presidência portuguesa do Conselho da União Europeia. Tempo de agir por uma recuperação justa, verde e digital.